they never got married or, had anything, I think, outwardly happen, but they were really, really close. And Brahms was kind of like a, uncle to their children. The Schumanns had 8 children, and so they, continued in this relationship. And she was a fantastic concert pianist, and was actually, in many places, more famous than her husband was. Clara was also a composer, but she then became a big proponent of Brahms' music and played his piano music a lot. And she's an amazing person. If you want to read a great biography, there's some really good biographies of Clara Schumann that came out recently. So she actually died the year before Brahms did, but she was his confidant, and in a sense was kind of his mentor, because he would always go to her for advice with his new music. So you should know that relationship between Clara Schumann and Johannes Brahms. So with Brahms, we're going to see that he basically excelled in the same genres that Beethoven did. So that includes symphony and chamber music, and then piano music, solo piano music. But in addition, Brahms wrote over 250 art songs. And so that's one area that Brahms developed that Beethoven didn't so much. Beethoven wrote a few songs, but not to the extent that Brahms did, or that Robert Schumann did. So Brahms was the most important composer of chamber music in the Romantic period. So, Schubert at the very beginning and Brahms at the end. So I think he wrote 23 chamber works in total for a whole variety of instruments. So 3 for violin and piano, 2 for cello and piano, all different combinations. The piano literature, Brahms has these fairly big piano sonatas, but then he didn't go back to that genre. And middle works were a lot of big theme and variation movements, and they kind of follow in that tradition of Bach and Beethoven. Those 3 composers were tremendous masters of theme and variation form. And so we're going to look at just the last movement of the 4th Symphony, which is a theme and variation movement. And it's very much influenced by a Baroque type of theme and variation, continuous variation, 2 of those, which are ostinato types of works, which means you have just this repeating theme. And those were called the Passacaglia and the Chaconne. So I'll just write this up here real quickly. So middle period works were a lot of theme and variations, and then the final works that he wrote were character pieces. And I mentioned that talking about the Romantic era, how popular character pieces were, but they didn't have descriptive titles like Robert Schumann would use. Instead, they were called more general titles like intermezzo or, ballade. But he wrote these collections of character pieces at the end of his life. And so this fourth genre, leader, also is very, very important. And we'll look at a couple of Brahms songs in the last section of the semester. All right, so also important, of course, are his concerti. He wrote 4 concerti, 2 for piano, 1 for violin, and then a double concerto for violin and cello. And that goes together, with Beethoven too, who wrote 5 piano concerti, and he wrote 1 violin concerto, and then wrote a concerto for violin, cello, and piano as a solo group. All right. So one of the things about Brahms is that he was a great scholar and studied earlier music, which was kind of unusual in the 19th century. Composers were looking to have their own unique sound, and so they weren't so much concerned with what had happened previously. Although they knew, Beethoven, and they knew the immediate preceding era of Viennese classicism. But in terms of knowing Renaissance music and knowing Baroque music, Brahms was a real scholar. And so when Johann Sebastian Bach wrote his music in the 1720s, 1730s, and 40s, that style was not popular anymore, and this new classical style was emerging, which is more simple and easily accessible. So Bach's music wasn't published in his lifetime. Only a few collections of things were published, and it wasn't until this landmark concert that occurred in 1829 in Leipzig, that was organized by Felix Mendelssohn of the St. Matthew Passion, that Bach's music became popular. And so, to mark the 100th anniversary of Bach's death, so in 1850, a group of musicians and scholars, intellectuals came together and created what's called the Bach Society, the Bach Gesellschaft. And so their purpose was to publish all of Johann Sebastian Bach's music. And so musicians could join this group. And Brahms was a member of the Bach Gesellschaft. So every year or two, then a new volume of Bach's music would be distributed to all of the members of the society. And so Brahms was really influenced a lot by Johann Sebastian Bach. And so Brahms was as great a master of counterpoint as anyone after Bach. And so these two types of continuous variation and it's kind of hard to call it a form. I mean, it is a form, but it's the most open form. And so it has the most flexibility and I guess the fewest specific expectations of what's going to happen. Continuous variation just means that it just proceeds from one to the next without having double bars and being indicated variation 1, variation 2, and so forth. And so these two were both types of dances. So this was an Italian dance, this was a Spanish dance originally. But they would typically be written in triple, so 3/4 typically. They would be written in minor keys. And they would have themes that were 8 measures long. I'll put here both were originally dances. So they have, much more in common than they have differences. So they're very, very similar. But the main difference between the two is the way the theme is presented. So the Passacaglia will present the theme in the bass as a single monophonic melody line in the bass. So, Bach wrote the two greatest examples of these types of variation movements in the Baroque period. And so his great Passacaglia in C minor for organ is the biggest, the greatest example. And so it was a really popular composition type for organ because of the use of pedals. And so the Passacaglia theme would be presented in the pedals, and then you'd have then continuous variations on top of that as the movement unfolded. The chaconne, on the other hand, is a work that presents the theme as a chord progression. So again, the most important chaconne in the Baroque period was the last movement of the solo violin sonata, or the partita number 2 in D minor. And that work actually is a work that Brahms made a transcription of for left hand piano. So there's also a very famous transcription by Busoni of this work in the 1890s that is now part of the pianist repertoire. We've taken that great work from the violinists. But any rate, these are two types of theme and variation that we're going to see in this last movement of the 4th symphony. Okay? So, we are going to stop there for right now, and then I'll tell you a little bit more about what to expect. There's some other classical elements in this theme and variation set that are related to Mozart and Beethoven and Haydn, but I'll go through that on Tuesday. So we'll do our review on Tuesday and practice listening, and then a week from Tuesday will be first test. Okay? Yeah, and please pass this word back.